The Trithian Empire's arrival on Earth was nothing short of spectacular. Massive ships, each one the size of a small city, descended from the stars, their engines roaring as they cut through the atmosphere. Earth's leaders scrambled to prepare for what seemed like the inevitable, the end. General Krun, commander of the Trithian fleet, stared down at Earth from the view of his command deck. His empire had wiped out countless civilizations in the galaxy, each one crushed beneath the might of Trithian technology and military might. They had come to Earth not as diplomats, but as conquerors. This little planet, barely a speck in the grand galactic scheme of things, had become a thorn in their side. Too many intergalactic disruptions. Too many close calls with human meddling. Krun was certain humanity needed to be wiped out, or the entire galaxy would suffer. He was confident it would be quick, efficient. They would land, issue their ultimatum, and Earth would surrender, just as every other planet had before. The Trithians didn't take no for an answer. And yet something peculiar happened when they arrived. Instead of military leaders, warlords, or generals, what they encountered was a history teacher. Professor Jake Harlow wasn't exactly who the Trithians had expected to meet. The human didn't even look like a soldier. He was tall, a little unkempt, wearing an old leather jacket with a coffee stain on the sleeve. His hair was slightly messy, as though he had just rolled out of bed, and he was holding a folder filled with papers, apparently unbothered by the presence of an invading fleet. Krun blinked in confusion. "Is this the Earth representative?" he asked, his voice deep with authority. Jake looked up, nonchalant. "Yep, that's me," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Professor Jake Harlow, history teacher. I'll be your tour guide for today." The Trithian officers exchanged looks. This was not what they had been led to believe. There was no military force, no leader rallying against them. Just some guy who looked like he'd gotten lost on his way to a lecture. Jake flashed a grin and gestured for Krun to sit. "So you want to talk about war, huh? Well, I think we should start with one of Earth's finest contributions to military strategy, the Trojan horse." The Trithian general wasn't sure what to make of this. "The Trojan horse? What kind of weapon is that? A wooden structure?" "Oh, it's more than that," Jake said with a laugh. "The Trojans were duped into letting it inside their city gates. They thought it was a gift. What they didn't realize was that it was filled with soldiers, ready to attack." Krun raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You call this strategy?" Jake leaned forward with a sly grin. "It's actually a pretty solid prank if you asked me. Like the ancient equivalent of a YouTube prank that no one saw coming. It's like those people who trick their friends into thinking they're getting a birthday present, only to get hit with a pie in the face. It's brilliant, in a weird, totally unnecessary way." The general's patience was wearing thin. "That's not what I expected." "Of course not," Jake said, sipping from his coffee. "See, you Trithians think war is all about big ships, firepower, and strength. But sometimes, the most effective weapon is ridiculousness. The trick is getting your enemies to underestimate you. It's how we've survived so long." There was a moment of silence, where Krun stared at Jake, his expression unreadable. The teacher wasn't like any other human he had encountered. He wasn't scared. He wasn't cowering. He was speaking like they were equals. He was acting like war was something trivial, a joke even. Krun could feel the tension in the air, his military mind running through calculations. Was this a tactic? A delayed tactic? Or had humanity truly become this delusional? Jake broke the silence. "Look, here's another one for you. You ever hear of the Battle of Agincourt?" Krun frowned. "What? Another one of your ancient battles?" Jake shrugged. "Yeah, but trust me, it's a good one. The French had one of the biggest, most powerful armies in Europe at the time. The English? They barely had enough to field a full battalion. But the English won because they had longbowmen. Simple, right?" Krun's expression tightened, confused. "Longbows? How could a few longbowmen defeat an entire army?" Jake grinned. "Exactly. The French were too overconfident. They thought their strength would just crush the English. But the longbowmen? They had the reach, the accuracy. They made the French look like amateurs. That's the thing. Humanity didn't win battles because they had better technology or more soldiers. They won because they could think on their feet, and they were always looking for ways to screw with their enemies. The Trithian general snorted. You think humans won because they were clever, not because they were stronger or better trained? Jake winked. Exactly. It's all about strategy. And occasionally, just pure dumb luck. Krun found himself leaning forward, intrigued against his will. You make it sound as though war is a joke. Jake tilted his head, considering. Not a joke. More like a really bad reality show. Where the winner isn't the strongest. It's the one who can survive the longest and make it entertaining. People watch to see who messes up. It's like those epic fails you see online. Except, in the case of war, it's a bit more life or death. The Trithian leader blinked. You are saying Earth won because of accidents? Jake grinned, clearly enjoying himself now. I mean, sometimes. But mostly, it's about keeping your enemies guessing. Making them question whether they're really in control, even if they have all the power in the world. Jake shifted in his chair, leaning back. He took a deep breath and gave a devil-may-care smile. Look, the point is, you Trithians are big, strong, and terrifying. But you've got one thing we humans have learned to avoid, predictability. You think you can crush us with sheer force, but you're up against a species that's made an art out of chaos. Krun's jaw tightened. I have had enough of your nonsense. War is not about chaos and pranks. It is about domination. Jake raised his hand like he was about to give a lecture. You think that's true? Maybe. But let me tell you, sometimes it's about showing up, taking one look at the battlefield, and thinking, well, this is gonna be a mess. And then, we figure it out. Humans are great at that. Making a mess and somehow walking away with the win. The Trithian general opened his mouth to argue, but something about Jake's calm confidence made him hesitate. Was it possible? Could humanity actually be this unpredictable? This tricky? Jake's casual demeanor didn't make Krun feel reassured. If anything, it made him even more unsettled. Was the fate of Earth really in the hands of a history teacher who thought war was some sort of cosmic joke? Well, Jake said with a grin, that's enough for today. I've got a lot more history lessons, but I think we're starting to hit the highlights. You might want to take notes. You're about to learn a lot more than you bargained for. The Trithian general stared at him, trying to read his face. It was then that he realized humanity wasn't going down without a fight. It wasn't their military might that made them dangerous. It was their unpredictability, their creativity, and perhaps most dangerous of all, their sense of humor. You're not what I expected, Krun muttered. Jake winked. I'm not what anyone expects. But trust me, that's your biggest problem. The conversation took an unexpected turn. Krun's patience was wearing thin, but curiosity gnawed at him. He wasn't sure whether to be infuriated or impressed by this human's complete disregard for the usual formalities of war. Jake Harlow was still casually sipping his coffee as if he were giving a lecture on Shakespearean drama rather than the survival of his entire species. I'm serious, Jake continued, tapping his folder. You guys think war is about superior firepower. You're dead wrong. Let me ask you this, Krun. How many battles do you think were won with sheer force? All the epic victories you can think of? The ones where the stronger side always wins? He paused for effect. Let me guess. You're thinking of all the big famous victories, like when your fleet obliterated that small mining colony in Sector 5. But that's not where the real magic happens. Krun narrowed his eyes. You are implying that our victories, our conquest, are insignificant? Jake shook his head. Not insignificant. Just predictable. And when things are predictable, they become boring. Boring is a problem. Boring makes people complacent. And complacency is how people mess up. The general gritted his teeth. So, you're saying humans never win because of strength? Exactly, Jake said, as though he were explaining the most obvious thing in the universe. Now, take the Battle of Hastings. You know it, right? The Normans versus the Saxons. One of the most famous battles in history. Kroon waved a dismissive hand. A minor conflict. Human history is full of them. Exactly, Jake replied with a sarcastic grin. That's the point. You look at this tiny little scrap between two factions, and you think, who cares? But here's the kicker: William the Conqueror was outnumbered. Way outnumbered. He didn't have the resources, the manpower, or the advantage in terrain. But what did he do? He faked a retreat. Kroon blinked, the word retreat ringing in his mind. A retreat? You're telling me that the leader of the Normans won by running away? Jake laughed, almost choking on his coffee. Yep. Well, kinda. He had his troops fall back, made the Saxons chase them, then turned around and ambushed them when they were spread out and vulnerable. And guess what? The Saxons lost. Total disaster for them. Kroon was quiet for a moment, processing the story. You think that's clever? That's not strategy. That's a coward's move. Jake raised an eyebrow. Coward? Nah, man. That's called baiting the enemy. It's genius. You see, war isn't about charging headfirst into a battle with no brainpower behind it. It's about manipulating your opponent's perception, getting them to act in ways they don't even realize are stupid. You think this trickery is how humans survive? Kroon's tone was a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Oh, it's not just how we survive. Jake smirked, leaning forward. It's how we win. And it's how we've been winning for centuries. Do you know how many times humanity has won just by making its enemies overconfident or plain dumb? More times than I can count. The Trithian general was growing more impatient. Enough with the stories. You speak of deception, but I've seen what your species is capable of. You don't even have a fraction of our firepower. How do you even think to match us? Jake paused, letting the words hang in the air. Listen to me, Kroon. You've seen battles, but you haven't seen war. You haven't seen how absurd it can get. How things can go from I'm going to wipe you out to oh shit, what just happened, in the blink of an eye. It's not about who's stronger. It's about how the pieces on the board move. Sometimes the best tactic is not to fight at all, but to confuse the hell out of your opponent. Kroon crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. And you think you can teach me these tricks? You think we can't win because we don't understand how your species fights? Jake leaned back in his chair with a grin. Oh, I don't think I can teach you. I know I can. I mean, after all, who better to teach the Trithian Empire how to lose than a human who's survived 500 years of ridiculous military blunders? The comment made Kroon's jaw tighten, but it was hard to ignore the truth in it. The more he listened to Jake's confident, almost carefree approach, the more he realized that maybe the human wasn't just a history teacher. Maybe he was a genius, one who understood exactly how to play the game. So you think you could trick my entire fleet with deception? By making us look like fools? Jake chuckled. Look, I wouldn't say trick. I'd say it's more about making sure your enemies are so bogged down with your ridiculous antics that they don't even realize they're losing. Remember the Battle of the Bulge during World War II? Kroon furrowed his brow. Another human conflict? Yep, Jake nodded, feeling the rush of getting into his rhythm. So, in the middle of a brutal winter, with the Germans launching a surprise attack, the Allies made it worse for themselves by acting like they didn't know what was happening. They played it so cool, even the Germans thought they were about to lose. The entire German strategy backfired because the Allies didn't panic. They let the Germans think they were winning until they were already way overextended and exhausted. Jake's eyes gleamed. That's what you've got to understand, Kroon. It's not just about winning a battle, it's about winning the perception. If you get people to think they've already won, you're halfway to taking them down. The Trithian general sat back in his chair, still grappling with the implications. For all their strength, for all their technology, the Trithians had never considered this, that their overwhelming power might be the very thing that made them vulnerable. And here was this human, This history teacher showing him the most absurd examples of how his species had, time and time again, defeated far superior forces simply by being unpredictable. Is this how you think the Trithian Empire would fall? Krun asked, his voice quieter now, the edge of his arrogance beginning to dull. Jake shrugged. Well, you're not exactly a small fry, but yeah, it's about using what you've got in ways no one expects. And trust me, if you guys go to war with Earth, you're gonna find a whole bunch of surprises waiting for you. A history lesson? Sure. But more importantly, it's a strategy lesson. It's like taking the classic playbook and turning it upside down. The Trithian general couldn't help but ask, "Why do you humans make war sound so easy?" Jake smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Oh, it's never easy. But it sure is fun watching someone else screw it up. Krun clenched his fists, realizing he had underestimated this human. And perhaps, just perhaps, Earth's true strength lay not in its military might, but in its ability to turn the entire concept of war into a chaotic, unpredictable game. One where the real victory wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in making them question everything they thought they knew about themselves. All right, Harlow, Krun muttered. What other lessons do you have for me? Jake's grin remained, but his tone shifted slightly. He knew that Krun was starting to take him seriously, which only made the next part of his lesson even more fun. Okay, Krun, now we're getting into the good stuff. Let's talk about the most legendary military tactic humans have ever pulled off, the Trojan horse. Krun raised an eyebrow. The wooden horse? I've heard the myth. How is that relevant to us? Ha! Jake chuckled. I love it when people think history's just some collection of dusty old myths. But listen up. The Trojan horse wasn't just a fancy piece of wood. It was one of the most brilliant psychological maneuvers in history. You see, the Greeks were stuck outside Troy for 10 years. They couldn't get past the walls, so what did they do? They didn't keep throwing themselves at the walls. That would have been a disaster, and they knew it. Jake leaned in, eyes sparkling. They pretended to give up. They built a massive wooden horse, filled it with their best soldiers, and left it as a gift for the Trojans. They wanted the Trojans to think they had given up and gone home. So, what do the Trojans do? They drag this giant horse into their city like it's a trophy. What happens next? Well, at night, the Greek soldiers inside climb out, open the gates, and let in the rest of the Greek army. Boom! Troy falls. Krun's confusion deepened. You're saying that the greatest military force in history was destroyed by a trick? A gift? Jake shook his head. Not just any gift. A gift that played on the Trojans' pride and their belief in their own superiority. They thought they had won. They thought the Greeks were finally giving up. And that, my friend, is where they got played. This wasn't just a physical defeat. It was a total collapse of their psyche. They were so sure of their own invincibility, they overlooked the most basic human tactic, appealing to their ego. Jake paused for a second to let that sink in. What's the one thing you and your people always do when you invade a new world? You assume you're the smartest beings in the galaxy. You assume no one else could possibly be clever enough to outsmart you. Krun grunted in frustration. And you think this myth is your way of teaching me something? Jake smiled again. It's not just a myth, Krun. This is the art of subtlety. The art of knowing your enemy's weakness. The Greeks didn't win because they had a stronger army. They won because they knew how to make the Trojans feel superior. They played into their arrogance. That's how you win, by exploiting the weaknesses they don't even realize they have. Krun's mind churned with the implications of what Jake was saying. So, you're telling me that you think humans could defeat us by making us think we're too strong? You catch on quick, Jake said. That's exactly it. You've got this massive fleet, right? You think you've got all the firepower in the galaxy, but you don't realize that sometimes, the best way to win is to make your enemy think they've already won. It's like giving them the illusion of superiority, then pulling the rug out from under them. Jake could see the alien general's expression change. He wasn't just listening anymore, he was thinking. Processing. Jake pressed on. Now, imagine you're in my shoes, okay? You've got a fleet twice the size of mine, and I'm just this history teacher. But I can play your ego like a damn fiddle. I know you're overconfident, and I know your arrogance will be your downfall. All I have to do is feed into it. I tell you all the reasons you're the most unstoppable force in the galaxy. I stroke your ego. I make you think you're untouchable. Cronus' jaw tightened. You think you could convince me to fall for that? To make me underestimate you? Oh, absolutely, Jake said with confidence. The best part is, you're already underestimating me. You think you're smarter, stronger, and more advanced than I am. But that's your biggest mistake. You're already blind to your own weaknesses. So when I play you like this, it won't just be an army that's defeated. It'll be your entire sense of superiority. Krun clenched his fists, the realization hitting him. He had been so caught up in his plans, so sure of his overwhelming power, that he hadn't seen the human's true weapon, his ability to manipulate perception. The mere idea of playing into his pride, of making him feel like he'd already won, rattled the general to his core. Jake leaned back and gave him a sly grin. Now I know what you're thinking, Krun. You're wondering how you can beat me at my own game. And here's the thing, you can't. You see, this isn't about having the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology. It's about having the right mindset. You need to stop thinking that war is just about weapons and start thinking about influence. Krun's brow furrowed. Influence? How can influence defeat my military might? Simple, Jake said. Because influence changes the way people act. It's what makes them do things they wouldn't normally do. You think your weapons are powerful, but it's your mind that's the real weapon. And once you understand how to manipulate that, you're unstoppable. Jake's words were starting to make an impression. Krun shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his mind racing. The more he listened to Jake, the more he realized that humanity wasn't just surviving by dumb luck or sheer strength. It was surviving because humans had mastered the subtle art of influence, of manipulation, of psychological warfare. It wasn't about brute force. It was about making the enemy think they've already won. So, Jake continued, you've got the power to destroy us. But if you underestimate us, if you fall for the same tricks that the Trojans did, you'll be the ones destroyed. You'll go back to your fleet and tell them how you thought you were the conqueror, only to find out you've been played. And the worst part? You'll never even know how you lost. The general's fists clenched. He had always prided himself on his military intelligence, his strategic mind. But now, Jake had shaken his confidence, planted seeds of doubt. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't as weak as he thought. They didn't need overwhelming firepower. They didn't need the strongest army. All they needed was to turn the entire concept of warfare into a psychological game. All right, Harlow, Krun muttered. You've made your point. But I still don't see how this changes the war. Jake's smirk deepened. Oh, it changes everything. Because when you've spent your whole life thinking you're unbeatable, the moment someone shows you that you're not, that's when you lose. And that, my friend, is how humanity wins. Jake watched Krun closely, waiting for the alien general's next move. The silence in the room was thick, as if the weight of history was pressing down on both of them. Finally, Krun broke the tension with a low chuckle, a sound that made Jake's grin widen even more. You really think this will work? Krun's voice was more contemplative now, his posture slightly more relaxed. You think I'll just walk away from this, abandoning my plans because you made a few jokes about ancient wars? Oh, not just jokes, Jake said, his voice dripping with amusement. What I've been showing you is how the greatest minds in history managed to win not by being stronger, but by outsmarting their enemies. That's the human way, Krun. We've never had the luxury of relying on superior technology. What we've always had is a quick wit, a tendency to make everything into a joke, and a knack for turning our enemies' strengths into their biggest weaknesses. Krun's eyes narrowed slightly. You're a skilled orator, Harlow, but words won't win this war. I'm not just talking about words, Jake replied smoothly. I'm talking about how you use them. let's take a moment to talk about one of the most important human traits, humor. That's right, humor. It's something you probably don't see as a weapon, but let me tell you, Krun, humor is the ultimate weapon. It disarms, it distracts, and above all, it makes the impossible seem possible. He leaned forward, sensing that he had Krun's attention. You think I'm just throwing out punchlines, but what I'm actually doing is showing you the power of human psychology. The best generals in human history, guys like Napoleon, Alexander, and even the more recent ones, knew how to turn morale into a weapon. If your soldiers are laughing, if they're enjoying the chaos, they're already halfway to victory. That's how you win without firing a single shot. Krun, still skeptical, frowned. I've read about the power of morale. But you're telling me that you think making jokes will somehow make my fleet hesitate? That we'll lose our will to fight? Jake's laugh was almost condescending. Not hesitate, Krun. Laugh. I'm telling you that if you want to win, you have to make your enemy feel ridiculous. You have to make them feel so silly that they can't help but laugh at their own destruction. He could see Krun's confusion, the way his brow furrowed as he tried to piece it all together. So, what do you suggest? I go back to my fleet and tell them to start cracking jokes to our enemies? Make them feel like they're part of some galactic comedy show? Exactly, Jake said. But it's not about just cracking jokes. It's about making them feel like they're already the joke. Take your invasion force, for example. The second you land on Earth, you're going to want to show the humans who's boss, right? But what if, instead of showing your firepower, you show them something absurd? Something completely unexpected that forces them to reevaluate their entire strategy. Krun's jaw clenched again. He was clearly trying to understand the angle, but it was an unfamiliar one. And what would that be? Imagine this, Jake continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. Your fleet descends on a major human city. The humans, expecting the worst, prepare to fight for their survival. And then what happens? You just stand there. You don't shoot, you don't fire any weapons. You just wait. And then you roll out a massive, inflatable rubber duck. Krun blinked, clearly thrown off. A rubber duck? Yep, that's right, Jake said, his voice full of mock sincerity. You roll out a giant, inflatable rubber duck, and you make your entire fleet march around it. It's completely out of place. It's ridiculous. And that's the point. Krun's frown deepened as he struggled to process this. And what would that do? Make them laugh at us? Oh, they wouldn't just laugh, Jake said, leaning in closer. They'd be so caught off guard, so confused, they wouldn't know what the hell to do. You've just made the entire concept of war into a joke. You've taken the gravitas of your invasion and turned it into a circus act. And that, my friend, will shatter their entire mindset. They'll stop thinking of you as a threat. They'll start thinking of you as the clowns in this story. Jake's eyes twinkled. And you know what happens when people think you're a clown? They underestimate you. They think you're not serious, and that's when you get the upper hand. They'll start making mistakes, misjudging your every move, because they'll be so distracted by how absurd you are. Krun's mind was working overtime, but he still wasn't quite there. And you think that's enough to stop an entire invasion? A few jokes and an inflatable toy? It's not about the toy, Jake explained patiently. It's about the message. The absurdity of it all is what makes them question their assumptions. It forces them to rethink everything they know about you, about warfare, about what's possible and what's not. It makes them go from "we're going to crush these humans" to "what the hell is going on here?" You don't need a big gun or a giant army. You need a mind that can make your enemy question everything they thought they knew. You need humor, Krun. You need to turn everything they take seriously into something completely ridiculous. Krun was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could see that he was starting to get it, even if he wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. So you're telling me that by making a joke out of war I could win? Exactly, Jake said. But it's not just about the jokes. It's about the power behind them. You've got to make them laugh so hard that they can't take you seriously anymore. And once they stop seeing you as a threat, they won't know how to react. That's when you've already won. Krun shifted, no longer as confident as before. And what happens if they don't laugh? What if they take your ridiculousness as an insult and come at us with everything they've got? Jake shrugged. Then you've got a problem. But here's the thing, if they don't laugh, they'll still be too distracted by what you're doing to focus on fighting. And that's when you slip in your real attack. You don't need 100 warships to win, you just need them to believe they're already defeated. The general was silent again, but this time, Jake could see that he wasn't just questioning the strategy, he was starting to consider it. The power of humor, the way it could destabilize even the most advanced military force, was starting to dawn on him. Jake sat back in his chair, feeling satisfied. So, what's it gonna be, Krun? Ready to take over the galaxy? Or are you going to take a page from the humans and actually learn something?